next, let's move on to question 4. So question 4, what we want to do is we want to think about the import tariff that's going to maximize the level of welfare at home, and what's the gain from it in terms of total welfare. So we've already seen that import tariffs, when a country is large, maybe net welfare increasing, as in the case of the previous problem. But you know, you might think that, well, hey, you know, why, you know, there must be some value at which you know, tariffs are too large. They, you know, they're the deadweight losses from some applying a tariff so large increase deadweight losses more than the increased government revenue. And so that's exactly right. And so what we're going to do in this section is we're going to think you know, about optimal tariffs, a tariff that a country may maybe apply that's not too low, such that it doesn't reduce world prices, but it's not too high, such that it doesn't increase deadweight losses too much. So as before, you know, if home applies a tariff, foreign's export supply isn't going to be affected. So so all we want to mess around with is we want to mess around with home's import demand curve. And so what that's going to do is we're going to add a specific tariff of T. Now we're just letting T be sort of vary onto both the price that domestic consumers and producers receive as before. So what is this going to give us? It's going to give us 20 minus P WW tilde tilde. We can actually call that triple tilde to differentiate it from before. It doesn't really matter. Minus 5T. Minus 5 plus 5 PW tilde tilde tilde. Sorry, this is a minus, and this is minus 5T as well. So combining terms, what do we get? We get that these negative 5 and 15 and 20 cancel to get 15. These negative 5 PW primes combine to get negative 10 PW prime prime prime, and then these 5 negative 5T's combine to get negative 10T as described. Okay. The equilibrium price, well, to derive that, we're just going to set, again, export supply and import demand equal. This sort of formula is holding up all through these section notes. And so what we'll get is if we add 5 onto both sides and add 10 PW to both sides, then what we should get is we should get that 20 minus 10 T is equal to 20 PW prime prime prime. I'll divide by 20 on both sides, and so what that will give me is give me 1 minus half T is equal to P prime prime prime, P world prime prime prime, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what's given on the slides. And so as we can see, the larger of an import tariff, of a specific tariff that we apply, the more the world price is going to be reduced through terms of trade effect. Okay, and so at a world price of P WWW, or sorry, PW prime 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 prime, I don't know how many primes I did there. We can figure out what the quantity of USB adapters traded is going to be. And so to see this, let's let's just plug into X, foreign's export supply at a price of 1 minus T over 2. So what is that going to be? It's going to be 5 times 10 times, 10, we're going to multiply with 1, so that gives us 10 minus, minus 5T. And so what that gives us is it gives us gives us positive 5 minus 5T. So, and of course that must be equal to home's import demand. Okay. So now we know the amount traded of USB adapters, and then if we take this is going to be the world price, and we just add on T to figure out what Home's price is going to be, then we can figure out, that that's going to be equal to 1 plus T over 2. Okay, and so now what we want to do is we want to figure out what's going to be the import tariff that maximizes the level of welfare at home, and what's going to be the gain from it in terms of total welfare. So if we want to think about, for instance, like this diagram that we have before, the diagram is going to be the same. All we need to calculate, and the sort of change in government revenue, all those boxes are going to be the same. We just now need to calculate the area of each box. And so in order to do that, one of the first parts is I want to figure out what the quantity demanded and supplied by domestic producers is going to be. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my standard equations of supply and demand for domestic producers and consumers, and plug in for my new world value. So what that's going to give me, it's going to give me 5 plus 5 times 5t, so that's 10 plus 5 halves over t, and likewise this is going to be 20 minus 5 minus 5t over 2, and so this is going to be 15 minus 5t. So now I know quantity demanded and supplied at home. Okay, and so what else do we need to calculate? Well, we need to calculate what's going to be the difference between the new world price so what's the new world price minus what the world price was initially. So that's going to be 1 minus t over 2 minus 1. And so that's going to be t over 2. And then finally, what we want to figure out is we want to figure out the new world price plus t. So this is the price borne by producers and consumers minus the world price, and that's going to be t minus 1 plus t over 2 minus 1, and so that's going to be positive t over 2. So those are going to be the heights of areas A, B, C, E, B, and D. So as we can see, so this quantities, we're just going to plug in for the quantities, the difference between quantities demanded and supplied at home initially and afterwards. We can go back to the graph and you can walk through this. And then here in each of these, we're just going to plug in for either t over 2. We figured out this, or what we're going to do is we're going to plug in for so in all of these we're going to plug in for t over 2, and then these we're just plugging in for the differences between the quantity demanded at home initially and the new quantity demanded at home, and the new quantity supplied at home minus the new quantity supplied. And so that's going to give us that these areas here are given by this expression, this expression, and this expression. So when we add up E and then subtract B and D, what are we going to get? We're going to get that we have 5 t minus, excuse me, oops. Sorry. Oops. Not sure why. So we get 5t minus 5 over t2, and then we get minus, minus, and I'm just going to take 2 times this. So what that's going to be, it's going to be 5/4 t over 2. And so combining, sort of multiplying this to get the same term here, what I'm going to get is that this is going to be 10 over 4. And so what I'll be left with is I'll be left with 5 halves t minus 15 over 4 t squared. And so that's what this is. Now what we want to do is, given this equation for the net welfare gain, which is 5 halves t minus 15 over 4 t squared, we want to just set the tariff to maximize welfare. And so the way to do this is just to take the derivative of this expression with respect to t and set it equal to 0. You can note that this will maximize welfare if this has and if this is in if we find that t has a local maxima, which it will, or if the second derivative is negative, which we can note that if we take the derivative here, it is. So okay, so taking the derivative of this expression with respect to t, what do we get? We get 5 halves minus 15 halves t. We set this equal to 0. And so what does that give us? That gives us 15 halves t is equal to 5 halves. And so multiplying by 2 over 15 on both sides, these cancel and these cancel. So what we are left with is 5 over 15, or 1 over 3. Okay, so that tells us that our welfare maximizing tariff is going to be 1/3. And then all we have to do to calculate the net welfare gain, we just go back into the formula for net welfare gain that we figured out in the previous slide, and then just multiply everything through by 1/3. So now that will be the fourths. Oops, I don't know what I did there. Wow, I'm not really sure. Oh, I see, I went on to the left side. Times 15 fourths times 1/3 squared, which is 1/9. And so it turns out that that will be roughly 0.4. So we've just derived the total maximum possible net welfare gain that we can come to, and so that so if a country is setting tariffs and all it cares about isn't sort of global welfare, it just cares about itself, then we figured out what tariff it would like to apply. And note that this only holds if our home country, the country that's applying the tariff, is large. If it's small, then any tariff it applies, see the results in section 9, are going to be net welfare decreasing. So that is section 10. That's all I have.